Thank you, Pila, and good morning to everyone here. I'm going to be very brief. Pila Sunday did introduce me, so she kind of spoiled my joke. You wouldn't have been wrong if you thought I looked more like a lawyer than a rural farmer. And it's because I am an attorney. I'm also a son of the Siska, so I grew up just down the road in Itlonte. And cannabis is very much a spiritual, cultural thing to me too, coming from this province. And to see the leadership taking the lead here is quite inspirational. So I just want to give you a little bit of, from the legal side, how I came to be involved. Peter Sunday mentioned the aerial eradication of cannabis, which was a process embarked upon by the South African Police Service, essentially on the instruction of international players in the international war on drugs. I invoked a legal strategy and process. We put an end to the aerial eradication, so the police haven't been back since 2016. And just that reason alone has brought a lot of change in those communities. But I must add, just because they haven't been back to spray doesn't mean that that issue has been adequately dealt with. So you can expect to see, if it sounds like a class action, then it sounds right. Don't worry, Honourable MEC Meth, we'll spare your department because you're supporting us. But there is still a strategy in place to make sure that the poorest of our poor. Peter Sunday mentioned these communities, you've got to cross a river to actually get there. What she didn't mention is that on pension day, the river's in flood. And the elders must then get floated across that river in a drum with a lid on, and then hike 2 hours up the mountain just to go collect their pension. So the struggle is very real. These are people that have been growing cannabis for over 200 years. They never ever got the government gazettes in 1928. So to them, what they've been doing, they've always been doing, and they're going to carry on doing it. To have government supporting it, it's very powerful and it's inspiring. So some of the legal steps that I have assisted the UFSN with, SAPRA submitted their guidelines in March 2017. These are the GMP and the medical cannabis growing guidelines we talk of. Together with the communities, we submitted extensive comments to SAPRA. Disappointingly, our submission was not even acknowledged. And clearly, if you look at the outcome of the regulations, nothing was even taken into consideration. But that didn't matter because we proceeded then to seek recourse in the international community. So we made submissions to the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. The extent of that submission was to alert them to the fact that of the glyphosate program by the SAPS, but also that South Africa is entering the medical cannabis market. And here you've got rural farmers who have always grown the crop. They need to be accounted for in this process if we are to be serious about alleviating poverty in this country. So fortunately, and perhaps surprisingly, the United Nations then set out a recommendation. So they recommended to South Africa that our government seizes the aerial eradication program with glyphosate, so in other words, they never use it again. But most importantly, the United Nations said that government must include these rural farmers in the booming medical cannabis industry. So even on an international level, the role of subsistence rural farmers is acknowledged. Then to speak about the existing barriers to entry just quickly. So I mean, there's only one legal way to cultivate cannabis in this country at the moment, and that's through the SAPRA regulations. So there's essentially guidelines, not proper regulations. But anyway, it's not about lowering the SAPRA bar, because it can't be lowered. It's an international standard, it's a pharmaceutical standard. It is set like that. So it's up to government and civil society to develop standards, not too stringent standards that have they're non-exclusionary, they include rural farmers. We develop standards to include these rural farmers within the greater medical system. Okay, so we currently are doing some research on our own so that we can prove to government that the cannabis that is being grown currently in Pondoland, there's tons of it now being harvested as I'm speaking. That cannabis is fit for medical consumption. And I think SAPRA really, when Mr. Wando spoke yesterday, he summed it up that SAPRA are more interested, and that is essentially their mandate, to control the medicines at the end, so before they enter the market. So we need then and it's very encouraging to see rural development taking the lead in this province, and agriculture. It's agricultural crop, we must treat it like that. On the medicine side, it must be treated as a medicine. But for instance, this tie is made out of cannabis. So we can't say now that we can't, and this is imported. although made in South Africa, but the cannabis came here to make this tie. Why aren't we making ties and suits out of the cannabis in Pondoland, for instance? So, in as much then as there's only the single entry, it's the medical way, that's all for export. So, we're making medicine for other countries. So that begs the question, what about our own sick people, you know? I mean, I have clients in the pharmaceutical space, and this is cannabis aside. These clients can't even register a generic to Disprin, for instance, because SAHPRA have such a backlog of over 20,000 applications that my clients haven't been able to register another medicine within 12 years. So to miraculously think now that we're going to be registering cannabis medicines, it's just not going to happen. That's the reality. But the real elephant in the room, and Jason from CDC touched on this yesterday, is that the greater majority, up to 80% of this country, use traditional medicines. And we need to recognize that. Dr. Gallo mentioned that only 70% of the people have access to medical aid. So the majority of our people are outside of those systems. And that's the elephant in the room, and we have to deal with that because our people need this medicine, and the political will must come to deal with it as a traditional medicine, because that is what it is. And just then maybe to conclude quickly, the cannabis in Pondoland, it doesn't have much recreational value, but has immense medicinal value. Dr. Gallo spoke about the research that was undertaken by the University of Free State. So there they tested 16 different known strains for cannabis property, or anti-cancer properties. And the Pondoland strain came out tops in respect of breast cancer. So it's really not about bringing the medicine or the seeds or the genetics to South Africa. They're in the Amapondo, they've been there. So my clients are not really interested in researching. They've been doing their own research for over 200 years. The research is done, the plant works. Let's get the show on the road, you know what I mean? And then just to finally conclude, it's very positive and inspiring, and I have mentioned it, to see the stance adopted by Premier Mabuyani and indeed Honourable MEC Meth. Having worked with politicians almost on a daily basis in my profession, to see political will such as this is rather rare, so I must salute you. So as here on behalf of the community and the communities themselves, we look very forward to engaging you. We do invite you to come engage next time at the Kumkulu, and we trust you will take it upon us. But one thing is very clear, and it's one of the principles that we stood behind, is that there'll be nothing about us without us. So either way, this revolution is going to be televised. Amandla!